The Christmas tree was still lit when I sat down at the kitchen table and opened my phone. The house was quiet. I had made coffee. I had wrapped the last two gifts the night before and set them near the fireplace. I had done everything a father does when he wants Christmas morning to feel right. Then my banking app sent a notification. One transfer, $43,000, gone before the sun had fully come up. I set my coffee mug down. I looked at the tree. I looked at the two gifts near the fireplace. One of them had my son Darius's name on it. Then I looked back at my phone. I already knew. I had known something was coming for a long time. I just had not known it would arrive this quietly on this morning, in this particular way that turned everything I had built into evidence of how long I had been lied to. Before I tell you what happened next, I want to ask you something. If you had spent 12 years building a business side by side with your own son, early mornings, late nights, every sacrifice you could make, and then one day you found out he did not just want a bigger share, he took it without asking and disappeared, what would you do? Would you call him? Would you go after him? Would you stay quiet and wait? Tell me in the comments. Because what I did surprised even me, and I think when you hear the whole story, you will understand why. My name is Reid. I am 53 years old. I live in a mid-sized city in Ohio. I own, depending on how you count it, a commercial landscaping and property services company called Reid Ground Services. I started that company from nothing when I was 31 years old. One truck, one trailer, one industrial mower I bought used and repaired myself in my driveway on a Sunday night. I had no investors, no family money behind me, no safety net. Just a belief that I could outwork every competitor in the county if I stayed focused long enough. By the time Darius was 19, the company was doing well, not wealthy but solid. We had 3 trucks, a full crew, a handful of commercial contracts that kept cash flowing through the winter, and a reputation in the area for showing up, doing the work right, and never leaving a job half-finished. I was proud of that reputation. I had built it through years of showing up even when I was tired, even when the weather was terrible, even when a client was difficult, and testing my patience. The reputation was mine, every piece of it. When Darius was 20 years old, he asked to come work with me. I want to be honest about how that felt. It felt like the best thing that had happened to me in years. I had built this company alone, not divorced, not estranged from my son, but I had been a single father since Darius was 9 years old. His mother, Patricia, had left the marriage for reasons I will not get deeply into here, but the short version is that she found something more exciting than building a quiet, serious life with a man who came home smelling like cut grass and engine oil. She moved to Atlanta. She built a new life. She came around on birthdays and at Christmas when it was convenient. I do not say that with bitterness. I say it because it matters to understanding who Darius became and how long it took me to see clearly. So when Darius, 20 years old, just dropped out of his first semester of community college, smart but unfocused, stood in my kitchen and told me he wanted to learn the business, I did not hesitate. I said yes. I handed him a uniform the next morning. I put him on the crew. I told him he was going to start exactly where I started, at the bottom, earning his way up, because that was the only way to understand the company from the inside. He nodded. He said he understood. He seemed genuinely eager, and for the first few years he was. I need you to understand what those early years felt like, because what came later makes no sense without them. Darius was good, not just at the physical work but at the business thinking. He had ideas. He spotted inefficiencies I had stopped seeing because I was too close to them. He suggested we move to a route-based scheduling system instead of the patchwork calendar I had been running by instinct for years, and he was right. That change alone saved us roughly 40 hours a month in wasted drive time. He was sharp. He made me proud in a way that reached deeper than just professional satisfaction. It reached into the part of me that had been raising him alone since he was 9, hoping I was doing it right, hoping all those years of stability and work ethic were landing somewhere in him. I made him a manager at 23. I gave him signing authority on the operational account at 25. I added his name to the company LLC at 26 with a 30% ownership stake. I did these things because I trusted him. I did them because I believed we were building something together that would outlast both of us. And because if I am being completely honest, I had wanted my whole adult life for someone I loved to want what I had built as much as I did. That desire, that quiet, deep need, is the thing I have had to sit with the most since Christmas morning, because it was that desire that made me slower to see the signs than I should have been. The signs started appearing about 2 years before Christmas. They were small at first, small enough that I talked myself out of them. Darius started showing up to the office later than he used to, not dramatically late, just 15 minutes here, 30 minutes there. He started taking longer lunches. He started spending more time on his phone during crew meetings. I noticed. I said something once. He told me he was managing a supplier issue over text and that I needed to trust him more. I let it go. Then came the girlfriend. Her name was Selena. She was 24 and she had grown up in a wealthy family on the other side of the county. She was not a bad person, at least not from what I could see at the surface. She was charming, she had good manners when she was around me, and she made Darius smile in a way I had not seen before. I liked her at first. I was glad he had found someone, but I started noticing something over the following months. Darius was changing his vocabulary. He started using words like brand and lifestyle and passive income in ways that felt imported, like he was repeating things he had been hearing somewhere and absorbing them without question. He started talking about wanting to travel more. He started making offhand comments about how other people in his friend group were making money without working so hard. I did not react loudly to these comments. That is not who I am, but I listened. And what I heard was a man who was beginning to feel embarrassed by what we did for a living. A man who had started looking at our company not as something he had helped grow, but as something that was holding him back from a version of himself he wanted more. About 18 months before Christmas, Darius came to me with a proposal. He wanted to use company funds to invest in a short-term rental property, 3 bedrooms, decent neighborhood. He had done the math, he said. He showed me a spreadsheet. The projected returns looked fine on paper, but I had 2 concerns. The first was cash flow. The property would require a down payment and renovation costs that would pull roughly $60,000 out of working capital at a time when we had 2 new equipment leases starting in the spring. The second was focus. We were a landscaping and property services company. Adding landlord responsibilities to the operation was not a natural expansion. It was a distraction dressed up as diversification. I told him no, I told him why. I was calm and specific. I showed him our cash flow projections and explained exactly why the timing was wrong. I told him that in 2 years, when the equipment leases were paid down and we had built our reserve back up, we could revisit the idea. He sat across from me at the office table and nodded. He said he understood. He thanked me for walking him through the numbers. 2 weeks later, I found out he had already been talking to a real estate agent. He had already toured the property twice. He had already told Selena they were close to moving forward. He had not told me any of that. I did not find this out from him. I found it out from my office manager, a woman named Greta who had been with the company for 7 years and who I trusted completely. Greta mentioned it in passing, thinking I already knew. When she realized I did not, she went quiet. She looked uncomfortable. I told her she had nothing to apologize for. I thanked her. And then I went home that night and sat with what it meant that my son had been moving toward a decision I had explicitly told him no on. Without telling me, without coming back to the conversation, without giving me the respect of a disagreement. I did not confront him immediately. That is important. What I did instead was start paying closer attention. Over the next several months, I began auditing the company's finances more carefully than I had been doing. Not dramatically, not in a way that Darius would notice. I just started reviewing the accounts more regularly, cross-referencing invoices, checking the operational account transactions against the job logs. What I found at first were small things. A few purchases from a vendor I did not recognize. An equipment rental charge on a day when no jobs were scheduled. Fuel receipts that did not match truck mileage. Each individual item was small enough to explain away. Together, they formed a pattern that made my stomach tighten every time I looked at the spreadsheet. I did not go to Darius with this. Not yet. What I did instead was call a business attorney I had used years ago for a contract dispute. Her name was Helen Marsh. I met with her privately. I walked her THR. All what I was seeing. She advised me to document everything and to quietly reassign sole signing authority on the main business account back to myself. She also advised me to speak with my accountant and to have a full independent audit of the last 18 months of company finances conducted privately. I want to be clear about something. While all of this was happening, Darius was still showing up to work. He was still managing crews. He was still on the surface my son and my business partner. We had dinners together. We talked about the company. We had Christmas plans. He told me he and Selena were looking forward to spending Christmas at my house. He told me he had gotten me something I was going to love. He said it with a smile that felt real. And I sat across from him at that dinner table and felt something I can only describe as a profound sadness. Because I already knew, somewhere underneath all the hope I was still carrying, that the person sitting across from me was not entirely who I had believed he was. The audit came back 3 weeks before Christmas. My accountant, a careful and thorough man named Gerald who had done the company's books for years, called me on a Thursday morning and asked me to come in. He had printed everything out and organized it in a binder. He walked me through it across his desk. The total amount that could not be accounted for through legitimate company expenses was just over $47,000. Some of it had been moved through vendor payments to what appeared to be shell accounts. Some of it had been paid out as inflated contractor invoices to a company that Gerald traced back to Selena's brother. Some of it was simply missing, moved through the operational account in small increments over 14 months. I sat in Gerald's office for a long time after he finished walking me through the binder. He was quiet. He gave me space. When I finally spoke, I asked him how solid the documentation was. He said it was very solid. I asked him if he had enough to support a legal case. He said that was a question for Helen, but that from an accounting standpoint, the paper trail was clear. I drove home slowly that Thursday. I did not call Darius. I did not call anyone. I went home, I made dinner, I sat at my kitchen table, and I thought about the 9-year-old boy I had raised by myself and the 26-year-old man he had become and tried to understand how a person crosses the distance between those 2 points. I did not come up with a good answer. What I came up with instead was a decision. I was going to let Christmas happen. I was going to let Darius come to my house on Christmas morning as planned. I was going to let him open his gift. And I was going to see what he did next, because by that point I had already spoken again to Helen, and Helen had advised me that the documentation we had was strong enough to move forward with a formal claim, but that we needed to establish clearly that any additional transfer of funds after a certain date would constitute a deliberate act. She had already helped me set a quiet financial barrier on the main account. Any transfer request above a small daily limit would require a second authorization from me personally. But the operational account, the one Darius still had partial access to, was not yet restricted. Helen told me to be patient. I was patient. I had been patient my entire life. Christmas Eve came. I spent it alone, which I had done many times before and which did not bother me the way it might have bothered someone else. I went to church in the evening. I came home and wrapped the last 2 gifts. I set them near the fireplace. I went to sleep around 11. I woke up early on Christmas morning. I made coffee. I looked out the back window at the frozen yard. I thought about the first Christmas after Patricia left when Darius was 9 and I had no idea how to make the holiday feel normal without a second adult in the house. I thought about how I had stayed up late that night arranging every gift just right, and how he had come downstairs in the morning wearing the oversized dinosaur pajamas his grandmother had sent, and how he had looked at the tree and smiled the kind of smile that makes you believe everything is going to be fine. Then my phone buzzed, banking notification. One transfer, $43,000, sent from the operational account at 6:14 in the morning. Destination, a personal account I did not recognize. I set my coffee down, I looked at the tree. I looked at the gift near the fireplace with Darius's name on it, and I felt something I did not expect. I felt calm, not the numb kind of calm that comes from shock, the other kind, the kind that comes when something you have been bracing for finally arrives and all the waiting is over. I called Helen, she answered on the second ring. She had been expecting to hear from me. I told her what happened. She said she would make 2 calls. And call me back. I made more coffee. I sat down at the kitchen table and waited. While I was waiting, Darius called me. I let it go to voicemail. He called again. I let it go to voicemail again. Then he sent a text message. It read, "Dad, I need to talk to you. I want to explain before you hear from the bank. This is not what it looks like. Call me." I read that message 3 times. I thought about calling him back. I thought about what I would say. Then another message came. It was a photo automatically generated by his airline app, a boarding pass. He had sent it to the wrong contact. He had meant to send it to Selena. His flight was departing at 9:45 in the morning. Destination, Cancun, Mexico, one way. I put my phone down on the kitchen table. I looked out the window. The snow from 2 days ago was still on the ground, thin and gray in the early morning light. I thought about everything I had built. I thought about the 12 years of 6 in the morning start times and the winters where we barely kept the lights on and the summer that the main truck blew an engine, and I had worked 4 weekends straight to cover the repair cost without taking on debt. I thought about every time I had said yes to something that was hard, because I believed it was building toward something worth the cost. Then I picked up my phone and I called Darius back. He answered on the first ring. He sounded nervous. He started talking immediately before I could say a single word. He said it was not stealing. He said he had done 30% of the work and only ever got 30% of the recognition. He said he was 32 years old and he was tired of asking permission. He said the money was his because the company was partly his and he had earned more than I had given him credit for. He said he had to go. He said he was sorry. He said he needed me to understand. He said it all in under 90 seconds and then he went quiet, waiting for me to react. I was quiet for a moment. Then I said 3 things. I said, "I know where you are going." I said, "The documentation is already with my attorney." And I said, "Have a safe flight." He tried to speak again. I ended the call. Helen called back 40 minutes later. She told me the transfer had been flagged and temporarily suspended by the bank due to the security protocol we had set up in advance. The $43,000 had not cleared. The operational account had insufficient funds for the transfer to complete without my secondary authorization, which I had not given. The money was still there. I want to tell you what it felt like to hear that because it mattered. It was not joy, it was not triumph, it was something quieter. It was the feeling of having done the work of protecting yourself before the crisis arrived and having that work mean something when the moment came. Darius did not come back for Christmas. He and Selena flew to Cancun. He did not open the gift I had wrapped for him. He did not call again that day. I spent Christmas alone in my kitchen, eating the lunch I cooked for myself with the Christmas tree still lit in the corner and the gift with his name on it still sitting near the fireplace. I did not cry, I want to be honest about that, I thought I might. But I sat there in the quiet of my house on Christmas afternoon and felt something that was close to peace, not the peace of resolution, the peace of clarity. I finally knew what I was working with, I finally had the full picture. And as painful as that picture was, carrying a full and honest picture is always lighter than carrying a beautiful illusion. The legal process began the second week of January. Helen filed the formal claim on behalf of Reid Ground Services. The documentation, Gerald's audit, the financial records, the vendor payment trail to Selena's brother, the attempted transfer, the text messages, the boarding pass Darius had accidentally sent to me, formed a case that Helen described as among the cleaner ones she had handled. Darius returned from Cancun on January 4th. I know this because he called me from the airport. That phone call was different from the Christmas morning call. His voice was quieter. Some of the defensive energy was gone. He said he had been thinking the whole trip. He said he knew what he had done was wrong. He said the amount he had moved in the months before Christmas was never supposed to be that large, that it had started small and he had kept telling himself he would put it back. He said Selena had encouraged him to think of it as his money because of the ownership stake. He said he knew that was not a real excuse. I listened to all of it, I did not interrupt. When he was finished, I told him that I had heard him. I told him that what he had described was not a misunderstanding about business accounting. It was a sustained decision made over 14 months to take from a company he was trusted to help manage. I told him that the Eggle claim was moving forward. I told him that we would deal with the business relationship through the proper process. And I told him that as his father, I was not going to pretend that I did not love him because I did. But love does not mean I set down the documentation. Love does not mean I absorb the loss and call it fine. Love does not mean I let someone who made these choices face no consequences because the relationship is complicated. There was a long silence on the phone. Then he asked me if this meant I was done with him. I told him I was not done with him. I told him I was done with the version of us that existed on false terms. He did not respond to that. He said he would call me next week. He did not call the next week. He called the week after from what I assumed was an attorney's office because the conversation was formal and careful and nothing like how Darius normally talked to me. The legal process took most of the first half of the year to work through. I will not go into every procedural detail because honestly it was exhausting and dry, and the important parts of the story are not in the paperwork. The important parts are in the conversations that happened around the paperwork. Patricia called me from Atlanta in February. I had not spoken to Darius's mother in over 2 years. She called on a weeknight and her voice had that particular careful tone she uses when she wants something. She said she had talked to Darius. She said she was worried about him. She said this whole situation could ruin his future. She said she hoped I was thinking about what it would do to him to have his own father take him to court. I let her finish. I asked her one question. I asked her where she was when Darius was 12 and I was taking him to school every morning and working nights to keep the business running and making sure he had everything he needed. She went quiet. I told her I was not asking her that question to punish her. I was asking it because she was asking me to make a decision about Darius's future, and I wanted to be clear with her that I had been making decisions about Darius's future by myself for a very long time. I told her I appreciated the call. I told her I had it handled. I thanked her and said goodbye. She did not call back. Darius's attorney contacted Helen in March with a settlement proposal. It offered to repay $22,000 of the approximately $47,000 that had been documented as misappropriated over the 14-month period. It included a clause releasing Darius from the LLC and terminating his ownership stake. It did not include an admission of wrongdoing. Helen told me I could counter or reject. I told Helen to counter. My counter required repayment of the full documented amount over a structured payment schedule, a formal written acknowledgement, not a legal admission but an acknowledgement of what had occurred and the termination of his ownership stake. It was not punitive beyond the actual loss. I was not trying to destroy him. I was trying to recover what was taken and establish a clear accounting of what had happened. After 3 weeks of back and forth, Darius's attorney accepted the counter terms. The day the settlement was signed, I sat in Helen's office and watched the paperwork move across the table. Darius was represented by his attorney. He was not there in person. I was there alone. Helen sat across from me. There was a moment after I had signed my section of the documents and was waiting for the confirmation that his signature had been received when the office was completely quiet. Just the sound of the building's heating system and the faint sound of traffic outside. I thought about the first time I ever walked into an attorney's office, 20-something years ago, trying to figure out how to file the paperwork to officially form the LLC. I had barely known what I was doing. I had felt out of my depth in a way I did not let anyone see. I had sat in a different office chair and thought about whether I was making a mistake, whether I was too small for what I was trying to build. Sitting in Helen's office on the day the settlement was signed, I did not feel small. I felt exactly my size. In the spring, Darius reached out on his own, not through an attorney. He called me on a Sunday afternoon in April, and this time the careful, formal tone was gone. He just sounded like my son. He asked if I would meet him for coffee. I said yes. We met at a diner not far from where I live. It was a Saturday morning in late April. The place was half full. We got a table near the window. We ordered coffee. For the first few minutes we talked about nothing much. The weather, a crew member Darius had mentioned once that he wanted to start writing things down, that he felt like he had too many thoughts and nowhere to put them. I had remembered. I had bought it 3 months before Christmas, because I saw one in a shop window and thought of him immediately. He was quiet for a long time after I said that. He stared down at his coffee. Then he said he was sorry, not the kind of sorry that sounds like the beginning of another round of explanation. Just sorry, clean and quiet and without anything attached to it. I told him I accepted his apology. I told him it did not fix what happened. I told him it also did not cancel out everything that came before it, all those years of work and partnership and genuine shared effort. I told him we had a long way to go before we could trust each other the way we used to. But I told him I was not interested in spending the rest of my life being estranged from my own son over something we could, maybe eventually, find a way through. He nodded. He ordered more coffee. We stayed for another hour. We talked about his plans. He had taken a job with a property management company. He and Selena were no longer together. He was living in a smaller apartment than he had been, paying down a debt he had taken on when some of Selena's brother's business had not worked out the way they had both hoped. He was quieter than he used to be. I could not tell yet whether that was temporary or whether it was the kind of quiet that comes when a person has genuinely reckoned with something. Time would tell. It always does. Reid Ground Services did not collapse while all of this was happening. That matters. I want to say that clearly because sometimes when people hear a story about conflict and loss, they assume the main character's world fell apart. Mine did not fall apart. My world contracted for a while. I spent several months working without a partner at the management level, relying more heavily on Greta and on a crew supervisor named Anton who had been with the company for 5 years and who handled the increased responsibility without complaint. I was more tired than usual for most of that first year. There were days when the weight of running everything alone again after years of sharing it was heavier than I wanted to admit. But the company stayed upright. The contracts held. We added one new commercial client in the spring, a mid-size office complex that had heard about us through an existing client's referral. We made payroll every cycle. We kept our reputation intact. And by midsummer, when the payment schedule from Darius's settlement had been running on time for several months, the operational account was on track to be fully replenished before the end of the year. I tell you these things not to prove I came out on top. I tell you because the story is not just about betrayal. It is about what holds when the betrayal happens. It is about what you have built that is yours, the real things, the things that cannot be wired away in a 614 in the morning transfer because they live in your body and your habits and your track record and your relationships with the people who have watched you work for 20 years. No one can steal those things. That is the part I had to learn to trust again after Christmas morning. There is something I have not told you yet, the gift near the fireplace. The one with Darius's name on it. I left it there for most of January. I am not entirely sure why. Part of it was practical. I was busy and distracted and moving it up the priority list felt unnecessarily heavy. But part of it was something else. Some part of me was not ready to pack it away and put it in a closet because doing that felt like making a statement I was not yet sure I believed. In late January, I moved it from the fireplace to my desk in the home office, still wrapped. I kept it there through February and March. In April, the week before the coffee meeting with Darius, I unwrapped it, just to see it again. It was a good journal, dark brown leather, smooth, with his initials embossed on the front. I had paid more for it than I usually spend on gifts. I sat at my desk and held it for a while. I brought it to the coffee meeting. I did not tell him I was bringing it. I pulled it out near the end of our conversation, when the ice had been mostly broken and the mood in the diner was as close to normal as we had managed in months, and I set it on the table and pushed it across to him. He looked at it for a moment. He looked at the initials. He picked it up. He did not say much. He turned it over in his hands. Then he said thank you in a voice that was barely above a whisper. I told him he was welcome. I told him I still expected him to write things down. I told him a man who does not record his own thoughts ends up living someone else's version of his story. He almost smiled. It was the closest to his old smile I had seen since before Christmas, and I will not pretend it did not reach something in me that had been waiting a long time to feel that small, specific warmth again. We are not where we were. I want to be clear about that. Trust is rebuilt in much smaller increments than it is broken. I do not have a tidy update to give you where everything is healed and the company is running beautifully and Darius is fully transformed and we have reconstructed the partnership exactly as it was. That is not the truth, and I am not interested in telling you anything other than the truth. What is true is this: I still run Reid ground services and I run it well. I still get up before most people. I still take pride in every contract we fulfill without cutting corners. I still believe in the thing I built, and I believe in it more clearly now than I did before Christmas because I have tested it. I know what it holds. I know what I hold. What is also true is that Darius is my son. He made a serious mistake over a sustained period of time. He let someone else's ambition and lifestyle blend into his own, and he stopped thinking straight about the difference between his money and the company's money. He was 32 and he was selfish and he was chasing something I could not give him, and he chose the worst possible way to try and reach it. And I cannot unknow any of that. But I also cannot unknow everything that came before it. The good years, the real work, the boy in the dinosaur pajamas on Christmas morning who had believed everything was going to be fine. I am not going to tell you what to do with your own painful family situations. I am not going to stand here at the end of this story and tell you that forgiveness is always the right move or that family always deserves a second chance. Those are decisions that belong to each person who has to live with them. All I can tell you is what I decided and what it cost, and what I think I built in the process of paying that cost. I decided to protect what was mine when protection was needed. I decided to document, to plan, to hold my ground through the proper channels instead of through chaos or cruelty. I decided not to collapse when the worst thing I had been quietly bracing for finally arrived on a cold Christmas morning. I decided that love and accountability are not opposites, that you can hold both at the same time, that telling the truth about what someone did is not the same as destroying who they are. And I decided eventually to give my son a journal, because I still believe, maybe too stubbornly for my own good, that people can change, not easily, not automatically, not just because they are sorry. But sometimes, when the ground has been cleared of all the comfortable lies, something real can start to grow again in the space that is left. I do not know what Darius has written in that journal. I do not ask. Whatever is in it is his. All I know is that the last time I saw it, on a visit in early summer when he came by the house and we sat on the back porch and drank iced tea and talked about nothing important for 2 hours, he had it with him. Dog-eared, clearly used. That is enough for now. That is more than I expected. And on days when the work is hard and the office is quiet and the weight of running everything without a partner sits heavier than I want to admit, I think about that journal. And I think about how long I held it on my desk, still wrapped, not ready to pack it away or give up on who it was meant for. And I think about how much of a life is just that same action repeated in different forms. Holding the thing, staying steady. Not letting grief decide what you believe before patience has had a proper chance to speak. That is who I am, that is who I have always been. My name is Marcus Reid. I built this with my hands. I protected it when I had to, and I am still here. I want to ask you something before you go. Not about the money and not even about what Darius did. I want to ask you about the Christmas morning moment, the part where I sat at that kitchen table with the notification on my phone and the tree still lit and the gift still by the fireplace. Was there a moment in your own life, maybe not Christmas, maybe not money, where you finally had the proof of something you had been refusing to see clearly? Where you finally held the full picture, and instead of anger or chaos, you just felt this strange, heavy calm? If you have had that moment, I think you know exactly what I mean. Leave it in the comments. Not the details if you do not want to share them, just a simple yes if you have been there. Because I think more people have sat at that kitchen table than will ever say it out loud.